we will talk about GMT watches today, and because the hype is real, we only talk about Rolex GMT watches, so the GMT Master. And we managed to bring 4 different pieces from different decades. So it allows us to nicely walk you through the development of Rolex GMT watches today. We will give you some information about each and every watch we have here on the table. Afterwards, we will provide you with some nice stats from our Chrono24 data. And for the first time, we will answer some of your questions, questions you sent us via Instagram, which was really cool. And let us know if we should keep that thing as a regular, so that we ask you for questions and we will answer them in the video. But let's not lose too much time and show you some watches.
Let's get into it.
So for those of you guys who don't know or haven't heard anything about GMT watches or the GMT function yet, I think it would be cool to explain it real quick. So, Balázs, how does a GMT function work, and what is it? What is it for?
Right. So the GMT is basically a secondary time zone that the watch can display. Usually, time-only watches have 2 hands or 3 hands. They only show 1 time. That's your local time or whatever you set the watch to. And the GMT is another time zone, and for that to see, you have to have a GMT hand, which is in this case red, or actually in 3 of these watches red, green on the 116710, and you have to have a 24-hour bezel. The 24-hour bezel helps you to set the local time, and then the GMT hand will show you what time is at that spot. So for example, if it's let's say 9 o'clock in the morning in Germany, set your watch to 9 o'clock like that, and then for example, that in New York, you want to know the time in New York, which is 6 hours behind, then you have to go back and set it 6 hours back, which is going to be 18. So then at the 12 o'clock position, you set the bezel to 18, so 24 minus 6. And then the GMT hand will point at 3, which means that in New York, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. 9 o'clock in Germany, 3 o'clock in New York.
And for that, you need the rotating bezel. This is a part which all GMT watches have.
Exactly. So when you pull out the crown and then you move the hour and minute hands around 24 hours, the GMT hand only goes around once. So in every 24 hours, it will go around once. And then, of course, some of the watches have 2 colors on the bezel, red and blue. So from 6 to 18 it's red, and from 18 to 6 it's blue. This is the AM/PM indicator. So when you wore this watch back in the 60s or the 50s, actually, when the first GMT came out, you could track your time zone. You can track your away time zone or your holiday time zone, and you could even see if that is AM or PM, which I think was a pretty cool feature. Of course, over time and with design, it's changed. In the 116710, you have an all black version. That doesn't really matter. I still think the coolest are the bezels with the two colors.
Cool. So it seems to be a complication for frequent travelers.
Right.
And when did Rolex come up with this idea to build a watch for frequent travelers or pilots?
Yeah, so exactly. So the idea, according to Rolex and the history books and urban legends and whatnot, came around the late 40s or early 50s, when flights became longer and pilots, especially commercial pilots, could fly multiple time zones. And Pan Am, an American Airlines that is defunct nowadays, but one of the, if not the most legendary airlines in the US back in the day, they asked Rolex to develop a watch that they could equip their pilots with. So when the pilots fly to a different time zone, they could set the watch to the time zone. Let's say they fly from Los Angeles to New York, they can set the watch to New York, but they would still see the home time in Los Angeles. And so Rolex took the challenge and they developed the GMT Master. And the colors, blue and red, became basically the iconic colors. So they chose red and blue, so whenever a Pan Am pilot was flying anywhere,
he's looking good.
he would look good, and you would see the red and blue bezel on his wrist, and you would know that's
nice marketing.
Exactly. And so the first Rolex GMT, the 6542, was introduced, and this was introduced in 1955, and it went on to production until 1959, so only 4 years. And this is the first GMT reference, very, very sought after, vintage collectors, very expensive. There's one flaw, the bezel was not aluminum like the second one, so they very often just break and shatter, so it's very hard to find a bezel in good condition. And then from that on, we move on to this one, the 1675. And so this was introduced in 1959, and it went on until 1980. So it's a pretty long production span. Caliber 1566 until 1964, and then this one is the caliber 1575, which went on until 1980. This has an acrylic crystal, so it's plastic crystal, cyclops at the 3 o'clock position for the date, tritium indexes, it's a tritium dial, and for the first time, the crown guard, right? There was no crown guard, there was a huge crown, but for the first time, the 1675, Rolex introduced the crown guard.
But it has no quickset, right?
No, this one has no quickset date, but it has a chronometer certified movement, which again, it's the first time that a GMT has a chronometer certified movement in the 1675, and you can also read it, obviously, at the 6 o'clock position on the dial, that it's chronometer certified. Then you have the classic version, which is this one, which is steel case and a Pepsi bezel. But Rolex also made the 1675-8, which was the gold version, and the 1675-3, which was a two-tone version. I think they are all pretty popular these days.
It's okay. And nice is the faded aluminum bezel. I like that, and many collectors like it.
Yeah, sometimes I think they go a bit crazy with the bezel, and oftentimes these bezels sometimes cost you more than an actual watch, which is a bit funny if you ask me. That's how it is.
And it's now selling for around 14 to 15.
I would say it's over 10,000 euros, depending on condition, depending on originality in terms of hands or service hands and dial and bezel, and of course box and papers. So this is a very, very interesting model, a very interesting reference. And the next one in line is actually the 16750, which is kind of a refined version of the 1675. But the 16750 came in 1981 until 1988, so right after the 1675. And that one had a new caliber, the 3075 caliber, which then has the quickset date. So this doesn't have the quickset. That one does have the quickset date, and it's also hacking movement. So when you pull out the crown, the second hand stops. On this one, it doesn't. Another interesting thing compared to the 1675 is the order of hands, how the hands are set on each other. On the 1675, if you want to have a look, you can see that you have a GMT hand at the bottom, then you have the hour hand, the minute hand, and the second hand, right, on top of each other. On the 16750, you have the hour hand at the bottom, then the GMT, then the minute, then the second.
Okay, so interesting.
At the same time as the 16750 was released, the 16760 was released around 1982-83 to 1988, and that one had the improved caliber, the 3085 caliber, again with hacking, with quickset and the 24-hour hand, which means that the hand could be set separately, whereas here you would have to go through 24 hours to set the GMT hand. There you could set the hour hand separately.
And they introduced
the sapphire crystal, yes. So this one is plastic, 16750 is plastic, and then the 16760 sapphire crystal, but still with the tritium dial, the tritium indexes. And that is the first GMT-Master II, which they called the Fat Lady. That was the first one that had GMT-Master II on the dial. They called it the Fat Lady because the case was much thicker than these ones. That one also had the first Coke bezel. So Pepsi's, blue and red, and Coke is black and red. So from the 16760 we go to the 16700, which was 1988 to 1999. And that one had the caliber 3175, sapphire crystal, tritium dial, and so tritium indexes until 1997, and around 1997 the T25, so the tritium marking from the dial disappeared, and then Luminova came in 1998. And that was the cheaper version of the 16710, which is this one finally.
30 years later.
Exactly, which came out at the same time. So this came out at the same time as the 16700.
I think you can really see the difference from this one to this one.
For sure.
So that it's more modern.
30 years of difference.
30 years, you can really see that on different details. For example, the markers.
Exactly.
Possible Luminova.
Yeah. This one is 1989 until 2007. And this is again a GMT-Master II with a caliber 3185, and then later the 3186 hacking and quick set date. And as you told me, we should bring up this little catalog from the 90s, I think.
1995.
This is, I think it's from 95 because it says 95 in the back, and it's a US catalog. And the prices, I guess, are in dollars. Yeah, you can see here.
That's interesting.
$4,350 for a Daytona back then. But it also has the 16700 that we just talked about. That was $3,100. And the 16710, Oyster Perpetual GMT-Master II, which was $3,300. So nice. $200 more got you this one.
And now it's selling for around 10.
I would say 10 to 12,000 exactly. Yeah. So.
And Oyster bracelet, what do you think about that?
I like the Oyster bracelet. I think the Oyster is more sporty, more sturdy, like
so
those ones.
So to go for this one.
I would say probably back in the 90s, if I walked into a Rolex store to pick up a GMT, I would pick it up on an Oyster bracelet for sure. And then of course, from the 16710, we jump to this boy right here.
And this is the 116,710.
116,710, right? So we just add one before the reference number. I mean, this is a fairly new model. This is 2007 until 2018. Rolex completely redesigned the GMT in 2005, which was their anniversary. Rolex was established in 1905, so for the 100th anniversary, they started to release a new line of GMTs in 2005. They came out with a model in 2006, but the first steel model was not released until 2007, and that's this one. This one has many developments compared to previous ones. The triple lock crown, the anti-reflective Cyclops lens, the green GMT hand compared to the red GMT hand, the ceramic bezel compared to the aluminum insert bezel, right? And
which makes it more robust.
Yes, absolutely. And so in 2014, they also released a white gold version, the 116,719, which was at the time the only Pepsi. So if you wanted to get a Pepsi GMT, you only could get it in white gold with the Oyster bracelet until...
This one came in 2018, the ELRO.
Yes, the 126,710, so 116,710, 126,710.
It's the latest Pepsi.
Right. This one is caliber 3285. 70 hours of power reserve, obviously chronometer certified like all previous GMTs. It has the Parachrome Rolex hairspring, the famous Rolex hairspring. And they went back to the Jubilee because if they stayed with the Oyster, you could buy a Pepsi in white gold and in steel and Oyster, which would have been a bit tricky. So they said, let's go with the Jubilee.
But it was seen a bit controversial, let's say, when it came out and the people saw that they used the Jubilee bracelet.
Yeah, and not some people wanted to put this bracelet onto that one to make it look like a white gold model. I don't mind. I like the way it looks. You can see the development in the case. It's getting bigger, it's getting more robust, it's getting more sturdy. Of course, it's a travel watch, it's a sport watch.
Still 40 millimeters, but
right.
The proportions.
Yeah.
And if you compare it to the, let's say, 1675,
I mean, you can see it's much thinner. But then we're talking 60s and talking 2018 or 20, so it's 60 years apart. There's a grandfather of that one. And they both go for the same or roughly the same amount of money, which is pretty interesting This one obviously 60 years older.
Yeah.
Many models in the market, many examples. This one,
compared to this one,
sadly not so much, or well, happily for the owners, sadly for the rest of the world. But it's interesting that the price around 15,000 euros on each watches. However, I think you have some more stats that you collected.
Right, we had a look into our data, and I came up with I found some pretty interesting stats, I think.
Okay.
And the first stat is that the GMT function is actually the third most popular complication, if you will so. First is the date function or date feature, which can be seen as a complication. Then we have the chronograph complication as second most popular complication in terms of sales on Chrono24. And we did a video about the chronograph function. The last video was dealing with this function. If you haven't checked it out, feel free to do so. And is this a surprise for you that it's the...
I think it's an easy complication to create from a watchmaking point of view. It's also useful. As far as I'm concerned, I don't care too much about the date. I care about maybe the GMT more than the date. And I really like a chronograph. As you can see, I'm wearing one. We know which one. As we're recording on a Tuesday again.
Speedmaster?
Yes. So for me, a GMT is an interesting complication. I have to say I don't really use it too much because whenever I travel, I just do it in my head. Okay, it's 6 hours earlier and it's 5 hours. But yeah, I think it's a cool complication, and I know that a lot of people use a GMT. So yeah,
great. And if we check the brands on Chrono24, which have watches with GMT function, we can see that the most popular brand is, of course, Rolex is also a safe bet. But on second place is Breitling, and then we have Panerai, Luminor GMT. I think this is a bit of a surprise for me that Breitling is on second place. I thought maybe it's Omega or
Tudor. Yeah, true.
So,
that's interesting.
Within the model line or the Rolex models, GMT, we have on first place, or the most popular one in terms of sales in 2019 is the black one, the 116710 LN. And then we have the Coke. After the Coke comes the vintage GMT 1675, and then we have the new one, obviously because it's only out since 2018.
Yes. And this was fairly easy to get back in the day compared to this one. I think if you got something from 2010, 2012, this was easier to get. Yeah. So maybe that's the reason. Okay, so now I think it's time to have a look at your questions that you collected from.
Actually, your questions, because for the first time, as I told you in the beginning, we collected a few questions. I am _ADNRA75. He asks, should I go for a modern or a classic GMT watch? So maybe 1675.
Yeah, there's no modern 1675. It really depends, I think. So let's move a modern and a vintage.
From a purely objective point of view or technical point of view, I would go for, or you should go for a modern one because it's...
Absolutely. If you want a watch for every day, as we just talked about, if you want a sturdy watch that ticks most of the boxes and you can wear for 20, 30 years, yes, go with the new one. If you want a vintage watch that you can love and enjoy because of its age, and maybe you don't wear it every day, and maybe you're not gonna go swimming with it and whatever, then go with the vintage one.
Next up is Tomo Weiss, and he's asking, what's the difference between the GMT case and the sub case?
What is the difference? I don't know. I think, I know that both of them are oyster cases, so both of them are water resistant. I would think that the GMT has, I think, only 100 meters water resistant, and sub is 300 meters. Regarding the size, I'm not so sure if there's any difference, but I'm pretty sure that you did your research on it. So.
Research, because I think when both watches are on the table next to each other, you can barely see the difference.
Yeah.
But the case of the sub is a bit, so the middle case of the sub is a bit thicker. I think that's the reason why it's 300 meter meters water resistant, and the lugs and the crown guards are a bit thicker than we have it on the GMT. So let's move on with the third question from Joshua Stoddard 1. He asked, will the Batman continue to rise? And another guy was asking, why is the Batman dropping in price? So it seems like there's a discussion around the Batman and the price development of this watch. And what we can see in the graph from our watch collection, it's actually true that there's a bit of a decrease in the value development of the Batman recently, but still on a very high level. So do you think it will continue to rise? What's your take on it?
I don't think it can rise too much. I think eventually after a year it will find its pace and to find its level, and then it's going to stay on that level.
So let's get to the last question from Luke Rausi. How does the Tudor Black Bay GMT compare to the Rolex GMT-Master II Pepsi, and what other alternatives below Rolex prices?
So the first question is, how does the Tudor compare to the Rolex GMT? Well, first of all, in price there's a huge difference. In size there is difference.
The Tudor is bigger. It's 40.
I think it's 42 millimeters. Yeah. In terms of looks, I think the Tudor.
41. It's 41.
Could be.
41.
The Tudor is more classy. This is more modern, more trendy. The Tudor looks good on a strap as well as on a bracelet, whereas as we just discussed, this is more of a bracelet watch.
Looks more vintage, I would say.
Yeah, I mean the whole Black Bay line is about a vintage-inspired collection. So I think that's more subtle, more elegant, more vintagey, as you said. Good on a strap, good on a bracelet. Great price point, obviously.
Sporty.
3,000, 4,000 euros you can get one, whereas this one is easily double if you get it in an 80, and if not, then triple or even more. And when we talk about what other watches come to mind,
I collected a few. Should I?
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I would say Grand Seiko, but you also have it on the list.
It would be interesting what you say. I think for 2K you could get a Oris Aquis GMT, which is a good choice. So like in the price range below 3K. Then for around 3K we have the Bell & Ross, the BR V2 93. For 6K I would go for the Omega Seamaster Planet Ocean.
That's a great watch too.
And for 5 to 6K pre-owned on Chrono24, of course you have the Seiko Spring Drive GMT. So this,
which is again a very different watch, very different looking watch, but a very cool watch indeed. Yeah.
Thank you, Balázs, for your answers. I'm happy with it. Interesting pick.
Thanks for the questions. I'm happy if you're happy.
Thank you.
With my picks
Sounds
and
good.
my answers.
And what about you guys? What Rolex GMT Master would you love to get, or could be any GMT watch? Just let us know in the comments below. We are happy to talk with you there. And
we have the links.
We have the links
for every.
Check them out.
Every model.
And maybe you will be the proud owner of a new GMT Master soon. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
And enjoy your watches, and see you next time.
Bye bye.
Subscribe to our channel. I forget.
Too many things.